Welcome back to our channel. The world is witnessing a whirlwind of events, shifting alliances, and geopolitical tremors. Today, we delve into a concerning trend that impacts every American citizen, especially those traveling or living abroad. There was a time, not long ago, when the American passport was a symbol, often met with open doors and a metaphorical red carpet in many corners of the globe. But the winds have shifted. Now, it seems that welcome mat is being rapidly rolled up. Powerful nations, one after another, are not just closing their borders, but are actively canceling agreements, and in some cases, forcing U.S. citizens out. Why this abrupt shift? What's fueling this sudden wave of animosity? Is this purely about intricate international politics, raw power plays between global giants, or is it a form of payback for past actions and policies? The reasons are likely complex and multifaceted, varying from nation to nation. But the pattern is undeniable. From abrupt military withdrawals demanded by host nations to increasingly stringent visa restrictions and outright bans, something significant is unfolding on the global stage. And caught squarely in the crossfire are American citizens, tourists, students, business professionals, journalists, and even dual nationals. These aren't isolated incidents orchestrated by failed states or fringe regimes on the periphery of international influence. No, these are calculated moves by established global players, nations with significant economic and political clout, making bold decisions that reverberate worldwide. If you believe your American passport remains the ultimate golden ticket, granting unrestricted access and goodwill, it might be time to reconsider that notion. The landscape is changing rapidly. Let's embark on an in-depth exploration of 10 powerful countries that are increasingly showing Americans the exit door. We'll examine the specific circumstances, the potential motivations behind these actions, and crucially, what this escalating trend signifies for the future of American citizens abroad and the broader implications for U.S. foreign policy and global standing. Understanding these shifts is vital, not just for travelers, but for anyone seeking to comprehend the evolving dynamics of our interconnected world. If you find this analysis valuable, please consider subscribing to our channel and hitting the like button. It genuinely helps us continue bringing you in-depth reports like this. And let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We love hearing from our global audience. Please stay tuned and watch this video until the very end, as we will be drawing some crucial conclusions from these developments. Our first stop takes us to Africa, specifically Niger. In a move that seemed to catch the Pentagon completely off guard, a significant shift occurred. Niger, a nation that had previously collaborated closely with the United States in counterterrorism efforts, made a startling announcement. Remember, this is a country that once welcomed over 1,000 American troops onto its soil, hosting significant U.S. military infrastructure, including drone bases crucial for regional surveillance and operations against extremist groups in the Sahel. This partnership was viewed as a cornerstone of U.S. strategy in West Africa for years. The U.S. invested hundreds of millions of dollars in building and maintaining these facilities, seeing Niger as a stable ally in a volatile region. However, the political landscape within Niger underwent a dramatic transformation following a military coup in July 2023. The new military junta, distancing itself from former Western allies, began reassessing its international partnerships. This culminated in March 2024, when Niger's military government unilaterally revoked the long-standing status of forces agreement with the United States. This wasn't just a diplomatic disagreement. They declared the continued presence of U.S. military personnel illegal. U.S. forces were essentially told to pack their bags and leave. This abrupt termination of a decade-long military accord represents a significant strategic setback for the U.S. in Africa and highlights the growing skepticism in some regions toward foreign military footprints. What led to this dramatic reversal? Analysts point to a complex interplay of factors: shifting regional power dynamics, the junta's desire to assert sovereignty, potential new alliances being forged, perhaps with nations like Russia, which has been increasing its influence in the region, and a broader wave of anti-Western sentiment sweeping across parts of the Sahel. You'd be shocked at how quickly the dynamics changed, turning a key ally into a nation demanding immediate withdrawal. It's a stark reminder that international relations are fluid, and that influence, once considered secure, can evaporate rapidly. This isn't a nation formally at war with America, which makes the move even more telling. It signals that American influence is waning, even in regions previously considered vital and secure partnerships. Think about the implications. If one strategically important country can shut the door so swiftly, booting out a significant military presence, who might be next? Are other U.S. bases around the world, particularly those reliant on agreements with host governments undergoing political shifts, potentially at risk of similar eviction notices? The situation in Niger serves as a potent case study of this emerging global trend. Moving across continents, our next focus is Russia, a global power whose relationship with the United States has been fraught with tension for decades, but has reached new lows in recent years. The warning signs of a deteriorating environment for Americans were accumulating long before the current escalation. Stricter visa requirements began appearing, making entry more difficult and bureaucratic. Consulates were closed, reducing the points of contact and support for citizens. A tit-for-tat cycle of sanctions, imposed back and forth between Moscow and Washington over various issues, including election interference, cyber attacks, and human rights concerns, further poisoned the atmosphere. But the period between 2023 and 2024 marked a significant intensification. Russia made its stance crystal clear. Americans are no longer welcome in the same way they once were. The actions taken became increasingly pointed. Journalists, particularly those working for Western media outlets critical of the Kremlin, found themselves detained on charges often viewed internationally as politically motivated, like espionage. Notable cases, such as that of Wall Street Journal reporter Evan Gershkovich, arrested in March 2023, sent shockwaves through the foreign correspondent community. Diplomats faced expulsion, further shrinking the channels for official communication and consular assistance. Non-governmental organizations, NGOs, with any perceived ties to the United States, especially those involved in democracy promotion or human rights advocacy, were systematically targeted, labeled as foreign agents or undesirable organizations, and effectively banned outright. Their offices were raided, their staff harassed, and their operations shut down. You might think this sounds like a return to Cold War dynamics, a Cold War 2.0. However, the situation is arguably more complex, intertwined with ongoing geopolitical conflicts, particularly the war in Ukraine, and Russia's broader effort to assert its influence and resist perceived Western encroachment. You might be surprised to learn the scale of previous reductions. Russia had already slashed American diplomatic staff by over 700 personnel back in 2017. But guess what? Things have only escalated since then. Today, any American traveling to Russia faces scrutiny far exceeding previous levels. Even casual tourists report being questioned more intensely at border control about their purpose of visit, contacts within Russia, and opinions on political matters. The message is unambiguous. Entry is a privilege, not a right, and suspicion often hangs heavy in the air for American visitors. Why the relentless rise in tension? It's a confluence of factors: deep-seated political disagreements, global power rivalries intensifying, retaliation for Western sanctions, and Russia's increasingly assertive foreign policy posture. The real concern, however, is the speed at which these changes are solidifying, and what this unwelcoming climate signals about America's diminished standing on the global stage, particularly with major world powers. Now, let's consider another global powerhouse, one of America's largest trading partners, which has quietly transformed into one of its most challenging hosts, China. For years, China was seen as a land of immense opportunity, a place for lucrative global business ventures, access to top universities for international students, and seemingly endless connections in manufacturing, technology, and finance. Thousands of U.S. businesses established operations there. Students flocked to its educational institutions, and travelers explored its ancient culture and modern metropolises. It represented a complex but often mutually beneficial relationship. However, particularly over the last several years, China has systematically changed the rules of engagement for Americans, and indeed, many foreigners. You'd be shocked how swiftly the once perceived welcome mat has begun to feel more like a red flag. What previously felt like an open invitation for exchange and collaboration is now increasingly layered with suspicion, pervasive surveillance, and abrupt, often opaque, restrictions targeting Americans. And this chilling effect isn't limited to tourists. We're talking about academics finding research collaborations suddenly complicated, CEOs facing unexpected regulatory hurdles, students encountering visa delays or denials, and journalists facing heightened scrutiny and limitations on their reporting. The shift didn't occur overnight. It's been a gradual tightening, but the cumulative effect is undeniable. Over the last few years, U.S.-China relations have strained dramatically, driven by trade disputes, technological rivalry, human rights concerns, particularly regarding Xinjiang and Hong Kong, and geopolitical competition in the Indo-Pacific. This tension has reached a point where simply holding an American passport can place you under the microscope. Major U.S. companies like Microsoft, which scaled back LinkedIn operations, and numerous others, have reduced their operational footprint or reconsidered expansion plans due to the increasingly difficult regulatory and political environment. Educational exchange programs, once thriving, have seen participation dwindle due to visa issues and concerns about academic freedom. Perhaps most disturbingly, some U.S. citizens, including business executives, have been barred from leaving China, placed under exit bans often without clear explanation or legal recourse, effectively held hostage over disputes sometimes involving their employers or broader political tensions. Why this shift? Officially, Beijing cites national security concerns and the need to enforce its laws. Unofficial analyses point to a growing mistrust, a reaction to U.S. policies perceived as containment, and an environment where Americans are increasingly viewed through a sharp political lens rather than as individuals. Ask yourself this: if someone pursuing academic research abroad can suddenly face intense questioning, if a business executive can be prevented from leaving over a commercial dispute tangled with politics, what does that imply for everyday American travelers or those visiting family? The implications are profound. The business environment is more precarious, academic exchange is chilled, and personal travel carries a heightened level of risk and uncertainty that was far less pronounced just a decade ago. Let's turn our attention to the Middle East, specifically Iran. This nation has long been a complex and often antagonistic figure in U.S. foreign policy, but recent years have seen the relationship become even more perilous for American citizens. Here, there are often no warnings, no second chances, and sometimes, tragically, no way out if you fall afoul of the authorities. The next country on our list, Iran, represents an environment where the risks for Americans are exceptionally high and well documented. While official diplomatic ties have been severed for decades, the underlying tensions permeate every aspect of potential interaction. You might already anticipate significant friction here, given the history of sanctions, nuclear program disputes, and regional proxy conflicts. But what you may not fully grasp is just how hazardous it has become for any U.S. citizen, particularly those with dual Iranian nationality, to set foot on Iranian soil. You'd be shocked to learn the number of Americans and dual nationals who have been detained on often unclear or contested charges, frequently related to espionage or undermining national security, often without access to due process as understood in the West, sometimes held for years without formal trial. These aren't just high-profile cases involving former officials or prominent figures. Regular travelers, academics, environmentalists, and humanitarian workers have all found themselves ensnared in situations that rapidly devolved from seemingly routine visits into terrifying ordeals of prolonged imprisonment. The U.S. State Department maintains its highest-level travel advisory, Level 4, Do Not Travel, for Iran. This isn't a suggestion. It's the most serious warning possible, explicitly citing the high risk of arbitrary arrest and detention. Why is the risk so acute? The Iranian government frequently detains U.S. citizens, especially dual nationals, using them as leverage in negotiations or as political pawns. Once you are inside Iran, the U.S. government has virtually no ability to provide assistance, as there is no U.S. embassy or consulate. Consular access for detained Americans is often denied, and legal representation meeting international standards can be impossible to secure. Think it couldn't happen to you? Imagine being stopped at the airport upon arrival or departure, or questioned intensely about your activities, contacts, or even social media posts from years ago. Consider the case of individuals detained simply for being in the wrong place at the wrong time during a period of political sensitivity. Here, the issue deepens further. Americans aren't just viewed as individuals. They are often treated as direct extensions or representatives of U.S. policy. This means that any political tension simmering between Washington and Tehran, any perceived slight or hostile action by the U.S. government, can directly translate into increased danger for any American within Iran's borders. Cultural ties, family visits, academic research, business ventures, all these legitimate reasons for travel have been severely impacted and carry immense risks. American NGOs are viewed with extreme suspicion. Journalists face constant threat of detention on espionage charges, and the overall environment is one where being American itself is a significant liability. It's a place rich with ancient history and complex culture, but currently, it stands as one of the locations where Americans face the most severe risks anywhere on the planet. Prepare yourself, because the next country takes hostility and risk to an almost unimaginable level. You won't see glossy pictures of it on travel blogs, and you certainly won't find it discussed in casual travel conversations. Because for Americans, this nation could very well be the single most dangerous destination on Earth. We are talking about North Korea. This isolated, secretive, and heavily controlled state operates under rules entirely its own, and the implications for any foreigner, especially an American, who enters are dire. North Korea has no U.S. embassy, no diplomatic safety net whatsoever, and absolutely no independent judicial process. Once you are inside its borders, you are completely and utterly at the mercy of the regime. You'd be shocked, though perhaps not entirely surprised, how many people fail to recognize the absolute nature of the danger here until it's far too late. American tourists, students, and even individuals attempting missionary work have been detained over actions that might seem minor elsewhere, but are treated as grave offenses by the North Korean government. Taking unauthorized photographs, removing a political poster or banner, even appearing to show disrespect to the country's leadership, or simply being in an area deemed off-limits, can lead to immediate arrest. Consider the tragic case of Otto Warmbier, a U.S. student arrested in 2016 and sentenced to 15 years of hard labor for allegedly attempting to steal a propaganda banner from his hotel. He was eventually returned to the U.S. in a coma and died shortly thereafter, having suffered severe neurological injury during his captivity. He never made it back alive to tell his story. Following such incidents, the U.S. government took the extraordinary step of issuing not just a Level 4, do not travel advisory, but also implementing a geographic travel restriction, legally barring U.S. citizens from traveling to North Korea using a U.S. passport without special validation from the State Department. This validation is granted only in extremely limited circumstances, and yet, the risks extend far beyond what's officially documented. What if you are accused of espionage simply for having certain contacts or information on your devices? What if you are compelled to make a forced confession to crimes you did not commit, broadcast on national television for propaganda purposes? What if your only crime, in the eyes of the regime, is simply being American during a period of heightened political tension? North Korea has a long and disturbing history of using detained foreign nationals, particularly Americans, as leverage in tense negotiations and as bargaining chips to extract concessions from other governments. Detentions often become international headline news, but the individuals involved become pawns in a high-stakes global political game. No one is seriously suggesting you'd ever want to vacation in North Korea under current conditions, but the point remains stark. If circumstances, however improbable, perhaps an accidental border crossing or a diverted flight, were to place an American inside North Korea, the possibility of choosing when, or even if, they come back is terrifyingly slim. Let that reality sink in. It's an environment where individual rights are non-existent, and the political whims of the regime dictate fate. Let's pivot to a country that straddles Europe and Asia, a popular destination known for its rich history, vibrant culture, and stunning landscapes. Turkey. It used to be considered one of the most visited countries on the planet, a bridge where East met West, attracting tourists by the millions each year. Americans in particular flocked there for tourism, business, and study. However, in recent years, the political climate in Turkey has shifted significantly, and for American citizens, this shift is becoming increasingly hard to ignore. You'd be surprised how many U.S. citizens have encountered difficulties or have been detained in Turkey, often not for clear violations of established laws, but rather based on suspicion, association, or for reasons perceived as politically motivated. While Turkey remains a NATO ally and a significant regional player, its relationship with the U.S. has become increasingly complex and, at times, strained. Political disagreements over issues like policy in Syria, Turkey's purchase of Russian military equipment, and concerns over democratic backsliding and human rights within Turkey itself have created an environment of heightened sensitivity. One American pastor, Andrew Brunson, was famously held for nearly 2 years without formal charges initially, later accused of espionage and aiding terrorist groups, charges widely viewed internationally as lacking credible evidence. His detention triggered a major diplomatic standoff between Ankara and Washington, involving sanctions and intense negotiations before his eventual release in 2018. But guess what? That wasn't an entirely isolated incident. While perhaps less publicized, other U.S. citizens, including journalists, academics, aid workers, and even tourists, have reported facing intrusive questioning, surveillance, difficulties with visas, or even detention based on perceived political affiliations or associations deemed problematic by Turkish authorities. It's not just individuals feeling the pressure. American businesses operating in Turkey have navigated increasing regulatory uncertainty, and nonprofit organizations have sometimes faced closures or investigations, adding to the sense that the operating climate for U.S. citizens and entities has become less predictable and potentially more hostile. The Turkish government has, on various occasions, accused groups or individuals with American links of inciting unrest or supporting opposition movements, fueling a level of political paranoia that can impact visitors. As these tensions ebb and flow, so does the level of scrutiny faced by Americans. So, here's the critical question. Can a nation that was once a welcoming hub suddenly become a potential no-go zone depending on the political winds? What happens when a casual visit, a research trip, or a business meeting turns into a legal nightmare based on shifting political sands? For a country that once so readily embraced American visitors, the current landscape requires careful consideration and awareness, as the line between guest and suspect can sometimes blur unexpectedly. Travel advisories often recommend Americans exercise increased caution, highlighting the potential for arbitrary detentions and the broad application of anti-terrorism laws. Think twice, because in this evolving geopolitical landscape, what felt safe and familiar yesterday might carry unforeseen risks tomorrow. Now let's journey to South America, to a nation rich in natural resources, particularly oil, but plagued by profound political and economic instability. Venezuela. Once a top oil exporter with historically deep economic ties to the United States, Venezuela has undergone a dramatic transformation, morphing into one of the most dangerous and unpredictable places on Earth for American citizens. The situation here is volatile, and the risks are multifaceted. One moment you might be navigating the complexities of daily life or business, the next you could find yourself on a government watch list, or worse. That's the chilling reality some Americans have encountered in Venezuela. The country has been locked in a protracted political and economic crisis for years, leading to hyperinflation, widespread shortages of food and medicine, crumbling infrastructure, rampant violent crime, and a near-total breakdown of the rule of law in many areas. The political situation is intensely polarized, with the government under Nicolás Maduro routinely accusing the United States of interference, sabotage, and plotting coups. In this highly charged atmosphere, American citizens are often viewed with extreme suspicion. You'd be shocked how fast circumstances can change for visitors. The U.S. government shut down its embassy operations in Caracas back in March 2019, citing deteriorating security conditions and the breakdown of diplomatic relations following the U.S. recognition of opposition leader Juan Guaidó as interim president. Why the closure? Grave safety concerns for personnel and the inability to provide adequate consular services. Now, with no official consular support on the ground, if anything happens to an American citizen in Venezuela, arrest, kidnapping, medical emergency, they are essentially on their own. There is no safety net. But the lack of diplomatic presence is just the beginning of the danger. Americans, especially dual Venezuelan-American citizens, or those working in sensitive sectors like media, aid, or the energy industry, have faced arbitrary detentions, long-term imprisonment on dubious charges, and have been caught in the crossfire of the country's internal power struggles. Accusations leveled against detained Americans often range from espionage and conspiracy to terrorism or sabotage, charges typically vague and lacking transparent evidence or due process. Some individuals have been used explicitly as bargaining chips in political negotiations between the Maduro government and the United States or other international actors. Imagine one seemingly minor interaction, one photograph taken in the wrong place, one misplaced comment interpreted through a lens of political paranoia, and suddenly you could find yourself embroiled in a major international crisis with little hope of immediate resolution. You might ask, why would anyone go there at all under these conditions? Yet some individuals may have compelling reasons: deep family ties that necessitate visits, long-standing business interests established before the crisis deepened, or involvement in critical humanitarian missions attempting to alleviate the suffering of the Venezuelan people. Every day, people navigate these risks, but the dangers are escalating. Beyond political risks, there's the pervasive threat of violent crime. Kidnappings for ransom, armed robberies, and carjackings are common, often targeting those perceived as having foreign connections or resources. Basic services like electricity and water are unreliable. Medical facilities lack essential supplies. Even securing safe transportation is a challenge. Venezuela isn't just politically closed off to Americans in many ways. It's a country grappling with multiple layers of crisis, making it exceptionally volatile and hazardous. The line between visitor and political pawn is vanishingly thin and dangerously unpredictable. Let's cross the Caribbean to another island nation whose relationship with the U.S. has been defined by decades of tension and restriction: Cuba. You might imagine a tropical island just 90 miles from Florida would be a straightforward trip, perhaps filled with vintage cars, music, and beaches. But for American citizens, traveling to Cuba comes with a unique and complex set of strings attached, rooted in a long history of political animosity and a strict U.S. embargo. The moment you consider a trip to Cuba, you're stepping into a realm governed by decades of specific U.S. laws, political tensions, and heavily restricted travel regulations. You'd be surprised to learn, or perhaps reminded, that general tourism by American citizens to Cuba is technically banned under U.S. law. Yes, banned. You cannot simply book a typical beach vacation. To travel legally from the U.S., you must qualify under one of 12 specific categories authorized by the U.S. government, such as family visits, professional research, educational activities, religious activities, journalistic activity, or support for the Cuban people. Even if you qualify under one of these categories, the bureaucratic red tape doesn't end there. There are strict rules about where you can spend money. Americans are generally prohibited from engaging in direct financial transactions with certain entities linked to the Cuban military, intelligence, or security services. This restricted list includes many prominent hotels, businesses, stores, and even some taxi services. Why? These restrictions are part of the broader U.S. embargo aimed at limiting funds flowing to the Cuban government. This means one wrong booking, one purchase at a restricted store, could potentially put you in violation of U.S. law, even if unintentionally. And guess what? Over in Cuba itself, while personal interactions with Cubans are often warm, Americans are still under a level of watch by the authorities. While mass detentions of tourists are not the norm as in some other countries on this list, the political environment remains sensitive. There have been reports over the years of Americans being questioned, monitored, or encountering difficulties, particularly if their activities are perceived as political or straying too far from their authorized travel category. Furthermore, the mysterious health incidents or Havana syndrome reported among U.S. Embassy personnel in Havana led to significant staff withdrawals and further strained relations, adding another layer of caution. No one knows definitively what caused these incidents, but they were serious enough to trigger major diplomatic repercussions and underscore the complex and sometimes opaque nature of operating in Cuba. Embassy services have been drastically reduced from their peak levels, meaning consular assistance, while present, is limited compared to most other countries. Obtaining visas can be complex, flights are less frequent than they might otherwise be, and even accessing funds can be challenging, as many U.S. banks and credit card companies block transactions originating from Cuba due to the embargo. So, what looks like a potentially simple Caribbean getaway is entangled in a web of U.S. legal restrictions and underlying political tensions. A trip requires careful planning to ensure compliance with U.S. law and an awareness that you are entering a country where the relationship with the U.S. remains fundamentally complicated and subject to cautious observation by authorities. Our penultimate country takes us back to a region scarred by decades of conflict, where the landscape is rugged and the political situation remains fragile and dangerous. Afghanistan. This is a place where danger isn't just possible, it's an expected part of the environment for foreigners, especially Americans. Here, danger doesn't wait for you to make a mistake, it actively finds you. Following the withdrawal of U.S. forces in August 2021 and the subsequent collapse of the Afghan government, Afghanistan has become an exceptionally high-risk zone for American citizens. Since the U.S. withdrawal, the entire structure of safety, diplomatic support, and predictable governance for American citizens has completely disintegrated. The U.S. Embassy in Kabul is closed. There is no official U.S. government presence on the ground to provide assistance or protection. That means no consular services, no emergency support, no established channels for communication, and absolutely no reliable escape plan if things go wrong. Americans who remain in Afghanistan, or those who might attempt to return for humanitarian work, journalistic endeavors, or deeply personal family reasons, face an immediate and severe threat of violence, kidnapping for ransom or political leverage, or arbitrary imprisonment by the ruling Taliban authorities or other extremist groups operating in the country. You'd be shocked how rapidly the situation deteriorated for anyone associated with the previous government or Western entities. Even trusted routes, local contacts, and established safe havens are no longer reliable. The Taliban now exerts control over the country, and U.S. passports are viewed through a lens of deep suspicion and hostility, often seen as symbols of the previous 2 decades of foreign intervention. Ask yourself honestly, would you willingly travel to a place where your own government has no capacity to help you if you get into trouble? Afghanistan is no longer simply a conflict zone. For Americans, it represents a near-total black hole in terms of safety and official support. The risks are not theoretical. They are immediate and potentially lethal. Remaining Americans have been strongly and repeatedly urged by the U.S. State Department to leave immediately, and travel to the country is advised against in the strongest possible terms. Level 4, do not travel. It's an environment where the rule of law is inconsistent, infrastructure is damaged, and the threat from various armed groups, including ISIS-K, remains potent. Finally, we arrive at our number 1 country, a nation in Eastern Europe that might not always dominate international headlines, but has quietly become one of the most hostile and dangerous environments for Americans in the region. Belarus. Blink, and you might miss just how quickly and severely things have unraveled here for Western visitors, particularly U.S. citizens. While perhaps overshadowed by its larger neighbor, Belarus has taken a sharp anti-Western turn, closely aligning itself with Moscow and creating an atmosphere of intense suspicion and risk for Americans. Belarus, under the long-standing rule of Alexander Lukashenko, has mirrored many of Russia's anti-Western policies and rhetoric, especially following the contested 2020 presidential election and the subsequent crackdown on protests. The relationship with the United States has plummeted to new lows. The government has significantly ramped up surveillance on foreigners, particularly those perceived as having links to the West or engaging in activities deemed politically sensitive. And Americans? They are certainly no exception. In fact, they may be subject to even greater scrutiny due to the geopolitical tensions. With Belarus's strong political and military ties to Russia, and its role in facilitating Russia's actions against Ukraine, the country has become increasingly isolated from the West. American diplomats have faced expulsion or severe restrictions on their activities. NGOs with Western funding or affiliations have been systematically shut down or forced out. Journalists, especially those working for independent or foreign media, face constant pressure, questioning, the risk of arbitrary detention, and accusations of espionage or inciting unrest. U.S. travelers, even those visiting for seemingly innocuous reasons, can face random searches, intrusive interrogations at border crossings or airports, and close monitoring during their stay. Even peaceful visitors expressing mild criticism or associating with local activists might find themselves treated with deep suspicion. You'd be surprised how easily a seemingly innocent social media post, a misunderstood comment during a casual conversation, or even the choice of hotel could potentially raise red flags with the authorities. And if an American is arrested or detained in Belarus, securing adequate legal recourse or timely consular assistance can be extremely challenging, given the strained diplomatic relations and the nature of the Belarusian justice system. Travel advisories from the U.S. State Department now strongly warn Americans to avoid travel to Belarus entirely. Level 4, do not travel, citing the arbitrary enforcement of laws, the risk of detention, the limited ability of the U.S. Embassy, which operates with significantly reduced staffing and capacity, to provide assistance, and the country's support for Russia's military actions. This isn't just standard diplomatic caution. It's an urgent red alert signaling a high-risk environment where the safety and rights of American citizens cannot be guaranteed. We've just journeyed through 10 powerful nations where the landscape for American citizens is undergoing a dramatic and often dangerous transformation. From Niger's abrupt military expulsion to Russia's tightening grip, China's pervasive surveillance and exit bans, Iran's and North Korea's extreme hostility, Turkey's political volatility, Venezuela's and Cuba's complex restrictions, Afghanistan's collapsed safety structures, and Belarus's anti-Western alignment, a clear pattern emerges. Americans are facing growing risks, reduced welcome, and increased scrutiny in many parts of the world. These nations are not just altering their entry policies or diplomatic stances. They are fundamentally reshaping the environment for U.S. citizens within their borders, sometimes turning travel, business, or even family visits into precarious undertakings. As promised, let's draw some conclusions. This trend appears driven by a confluence of factors. Geopolitical shifts are undeniable, with rising powers challenging U.S. dominance and forging new alliances. Political ideologies clash, leading to mistrust and suspicion. National security concerns, whether legitimate or pretextual, are frequently cited to justify increased surveillance and restrictions. Retaliation for U.S. sanctions or policies plays a significant role in some cases, and a growing desire for national sovereignty, pushing back against perceived foreign interference, is a recurring theme. The consequence is that the American passport, once a near universal key, now carries liabilities in certain contexts. Americans abroad are increasingly viewed not just as individuals, but as representatives of U.S. government policy, making them potential targets or pawns when diplomatic relations sour. The risks range from bureaucratic hurdles and visa denials to arbitrary detention, political leveraging, and, in the most extreme cases, physical danger with little or no consular protection available. This trend underscores the changing nature of global power dynamics and the complex, sometimes perilous, reality facing American citizens navigating an increasingly multipolar and contentious world. Staying informed and exercising extreme caution is no longer just advisable, it's essential. If you found this deep dive insightful and important, please hit that like button, subscribe to our channel for more fact-based analysis, and share this video with others who need to understand these critical global shifts. Spreading awareness helps everyone grasp the risks, the tensions, and the underlying realities shaping our world. Don't forget to check the notification bell so you don't miss our future reports, where we'll continue to bring you the most shocking, dramatic, and thought-provoking content grounded in facts, not fiction. Thanks for watching. Stay safe, stay informed, and keep seeking the truth. Foreign policy, Global risk. Americans abroad. A detailed look at 10 countries increasingly hostile towards American citizens, exploring the reasons behind this shift, including geopolitical tensions, political retaliation, and national security concerns, and the resulting risks for U.S. travelers, businesses, and residents. Hashtag News. Politics. Say. World News. Geopolitics. Russia. China. Iran. North Korea. Travel warning. Niger. Afghanistan. Cuba. Venezuela. Turkey. Belarus. Top 10 countries. Kicking out. Americans. Why the welcome mat is gone. U.S. influence crisis. Is your U.S. passport becoming worthless? 10 nations turning hostile. Global politics explained. Warning, 7 signs. America is losing global respect. Countries closing doors to U.S. citizens. Politics, power, payback. 10 countries where Americans face extreme risk. Travel alert, 2024. Red carpet rolled up. 10 countries. Now kicking out. Americans, U.S. influence. Declining. Niger, Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, Turkey, Venezuela, Cuba, Afghanistan, Belarus, U.S. foreign policy, geopolitics, travel warning, American citizens abroad, international relations, declining U.S. influence, political risk, national security, fun, info fact. Introduction. The changing global welcome for Americans. 145. Niger. Military exit demand. Explained. 3:30. Russia. Escalating tensions and restrictions. 5:15. China. Surveillance, exit bans, and business. Chill. 7 o'clock. Iran. Extreme risks and political pawns. 8:45. North Korea. The most dangerous destination. 10:30. Turkey. NATO. Ally with shifting sands. 12:15. Venezuela. Crisis, crime, and consular absence. 1400. Cuba. Embargo, restrictions, and lingering tensions. 1545. Afghanistan. Post-withdrawal danger zone. 1730. Belarus. Anti-Western alignment and high scrutiny. 1915. Conclusion. Why is this happening and what it means? Generate an image of a frayed American flag welcome mat being rolled up in front of imposing shadowy government buildings representing various nations. Create a world map highlighting the 10 mentioned countries in red, with large X marks or denied stamps over them, symbolizing restricted access for Americans. Illustrate a split image, one side showing a welcoming red carpet leading into a country, the other side showing a closed, imposing border gate with warning signs directed at Americans. Your passport is worthless here. They hate Americans now. Find out where. Trapped abroad. The new reality for U.S. citizens. 1. Dramatic image. 2 U.S. flags flying proudly in front of a grand classical-style government building under a warm sunset glow. 2. Juxtaposition. Same building but now dark, flags tattered, and a large closed or denied stamp overlaid. 3. Busy New York City street scene, Times Square or similar, focusing on diverse crowds, symbolizing American presence. 4. Animated graphic, a line of international flags, G7, G20 type, with the U.S. flag prominently displayed, then fading or being removed. 5. Symbolic image, a passport with a large red X or cancelled stamp over the American eagle emblem. 6. Concept art, silhouetted figures representing Americans being pushed back from abstract national borders. 7. Map of Africa highlighting Niger, with U.S. military base icons being crossed out. 8. Drone shot, busy street traffic in an African city, like Niamey or Lagos. 9. Map of Russia, showing Moscow Kremlin, with visa stamps turning into rejection symbols. 10. Image, Red Square, St. Basil's Cathedral at night, looking imposing, perhaps with overlay graphics of barred windows. 11. Hand stamping, denied onto a U.S. visa application form. 12. Map of China, Shanghai skyline or Great Wall, overlaid with surveillance camera icons and data streams. 13. Crowded street scene in a major Chinese city, e.g., Shanghai's Nanjing Road. 14. Map of Iran, Azadi Tower or Persepolis, with dark clouds gathering overhead and warning symbols. 15. Image, Azadi Tower in Tehran, looking isolated or imposing. 16. Map of North Korea, Pyongyang skyline with Ryugyong Hotel, marked with extreme danger symbols, skull and crossbones. 17. Image, bronze statues of Kim Il-sung and Kim Jong-il in Pyongyang, looming large. 18. Map of Turkey, Hagia Sophia or Blue Mosque, with question marks and fluctuating arrows indicating uncertainty. 19. Aerial view of Istanbul, showing the Bosphorus Strait. 20. Map of Venezuela, Caracas skyline, showing economic decline symbols, graphs pointing down, empty oil barrels.